2 people shot in the head, execution style. That looks like a hit to me.
A brutal killing.
The shocking part is that it was a family, newlyweds, starting out their life.
A dark mystery with multiple suspects.
She wasn't going to see him anymore because she was dating someone else.
They had an argument. He was mad, and he was going to kill him.
He had driven by the home. Is it a stalking situation?
He kind of ripped him off. And you don't do that to the Brotherhood.
The truth will be revealed.
He lived a very dark world, and he knew that he was going to be exposed.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer. Holland, Michigan. One of the Midwest's oldest and prettiest towns.
It's kind of originally a Dutch community that was formed many, many years ago.
It's a small community. It's very common for you to leave your doors unlocked, leave your keys in your car. Just a good place, nice place to live.
But a double homicide changes that in an instant.
When I first got to the scene, I was approached by the responding officer. He informed me that there was a female victim in the house and that there was another victim in the automobile outside of the house.
The couple are identified as Rick and Gail Brink.
The victim in the house was lying on her back in bed. She had 3 wounds in her head. The male victim had 2 bullet holes in the left side of his head.
The passenger front window was shot out, so there was at least 3 rounds that we knew of that were shot.
He was lying face down. His torso was over the console, and his head was face down on the passenger seat.
Detective Lauren Wasink is now responsible for finding the couple's killer.
Your on-the-spot reporter, reporting to you from Ransom Street. This is the new residence of Rick and Gail Brink.
It was a family, just a newlyweds, lived out in the country, starting out their life. They recently just bought this house with the help of Rick's father. And the house needed a lot of work, and between he and Gail, they done the work over a period of months to get it prepared to live in.
Now that we've got that on film, at least soundtrack.
They had a lot of friends, well-liked. Gail was always a very social person. Rick was in sales in his company, very respected, was doing very well.
Again.
The shocking part is the fact there was someone out there who was capable of killing this young family.
Rick on the ranch, signing off.
Bye.
The key to solving their murder will be in unpacking every detail of the last day of their lives.
Whenever you're doing any type of investigation, it's just kind of basic that you do get a timeline where your victims were prior to their homicide.
The first indication that particular morning, that there may have been a problem was when Rick didn't show up for work. His employer called a company where Gail worked, found out that Gail hadn't come to work. Someone in the meantime got a hold of Rick's parents. Rick's mother decided that she'd like to go out there and check. So the bodies were discovered by Rick's parents. Based on the medical examiner, stomach contents gives us a pretty good idea that they were probably killed between Saturday night late and early Sunday morning.
Detectives examine the crime scene to determine the events leading up to the murder.
Rick was dressed in his dress slacks. I believe he had on suspenders, a belt, and a shirt. And then he had on his work galoshes that he appears to have kind of slid on.
It appeared as though Rick might have been drinking a beer, watching TV. At some point, something caused him to put his boots on and his coat on and to go out to the vehicle. But the ignition was off, the window was rolled 3/4 down. Cold weather, why is his window open? Was Rick on his way someplace? And did he then encounter someone? At that time, we didn't know. We checked for casings inside and outside of the house. None were found.
So either the suspect cleaned up the shell casings, or it was a revolver and they remained within the gun. After autopsies, it was confirmed that they were .22 caliber rounds.
Gail's dress was basically dropped along the floor next to the bed. So it would have appeared that she would have basically disrobed and then crawled right in bed.
The contents of Gail's purse were emptied out. Rick's wallet was lying there open. There was $400 and some in a drawer, so we don't feel robbery was an issue at all.
That, to me, says it was somebody who knew the victim.
From there on, it was from the inner circle and going out, talking to family members and seeing what they knew.
As police continue to work the scene, Gail's brother, Ryan Wingarden, arrives.
Ryan and his sister always seemed to have gotten along well. He was obviously somewhat distraught over what had happened. Ryan indicated that he was with his girlfriend, Pam, all weekend.
Ryan said they didn't see Rick and Gail, and they didn't find out that they were dead until Monday morning.
Ryan is, however, quick to tell detectives about a turbulent relationship from Gail's past.
Ryan told us about Gail's ex-boyfriend. Lars was quite a serious boyfriend. In fact, they lived together for a length of time and were planning on getting married. Well, that fell apart when Gail met Rick.
Ryan tells detectives when they parted ways, things turned violent.
Lars had packed up Gail's belongings, knowing she was going to come and pick him up. They got into a confrontation about what she was taking. And he slapped Gail.
Gail's brother Ryan went after him, and, he backed off right away.
Jealousy can be a very powerful, potent emotion that drives people to do irrational things and violent things.
Ryan then adds something that potentially puts Lars directly on the timeline of the murder.
Ryan had told us that he talked to Lars at a laundromat on Saturday evening before this killing. Lars asked how Gail was doing.
Lars said he was going to the bar, what's called Calypso's.
It's the same bar where Rick and Gail went. after attending a wedding earlier in the day.
So then you think, if they would have gone to Calypso's, they would have seen Gail's ex-boyfriend. Did he see Gail? Did it just kind of ignite all those feelings? Did something happen there?
If you're looking for some type of a motive, Lars would have had one.
Detectives have identified their first person of interest in the deaths of Rick and Gail Brink, Gail's ex-boyfriend, Lars.
Sometimes an obsession can start with a small kernel and grow. And it can grow to the point where people will commit murder.
We interviewed Lars. I asked him how he felt about Gail and about Rick. He said he would be happy if Rick and Gail split up because he still loved her.
At one point, he admitted that he had driven by the home just because, you know, he was really infatuated with her.
He indicated to me that he still had a wedding picture of Rick and Gail in his belongings.
Police shift their focus to his whereabouts on the night of the murder.
He admitted that he had gone with a friend to Calypso's, where the wedding party went after the reception. Lars said he actually recalled seeing some people come in from a wedding, but that he did not even know that Gail was at that wedding. Then he had actually, after that, gone home and was there for the night.
He said he might have got back at midnight.
Detectives must determine if Lars is telling the truth.
We started interviewing those people that were present at the wedding, trying to gain any information that we could get, whether there had been some difficulties between the two of them.
Gail was not a really big drinker, and I think she had had some champagne and got a little tipsy. When you start adding alcohol to any incident, sometimes, you know, either people are gonna be happy drunks or they're not gonna be. But there was no fight that broke out. And everybody said Rick was just kind of, you know, good old Rick. Come on, I'm gonna take my wife home.
In talking to persons with Rick and Gail, they thought they left between 10:30 and 11:30 at night.
And that was the last they were seen.
This lines up with Lars' version of events, but doesn't rule out the possibility he went to their house later that night.
We polygraphed him. Lars was more than willing to take a polygraph. He passed without any problem. Looking at the whole scope of it, the polygraph, his demeanor, his feelings towards Gail, I'm convinced he would have never hurt Gail, even though he slapped her. People can wrong you. You don't go kill them. I felt in my mind that Lars was not involved and we should go on to some other place. And by that time, there was tips coming in, many calls about the person who lived there prior to Rick and Gail Brink.
Sid Colby lived there with his girlfriend, and they were about to lose the home, so they sold it. He was a road knight, which is a biker gang that was in existence in the Holland area. If ever there was anything going on that was illegal, a lot of times Sid Colby was involved in it. People were concerned, could he have been involved because of the fact that Sid was not happy that he lost this home?
He was always on the edge, always dealing in drugs. He'd try to impress people that I'm armed, you don't mess with me, you don't mess with my girlfriend.
Sid Colby, he was crazy. I mean, he was nuts. He was a habitual liar, and he was paranoid.
A lot of the paranoia, I think, was because he took a lot of drugs.
So it was definitely something you had to look at. It carried a little different priority level than just random guy that lived there.
They managed to track a skittish Sid Colby down at his new place.
We determined that that night, Sid said he was at a local bar where he hung out frequently, and then he said he went home. But once it got after midnight, we weren't too sure where Sid was anymore.
There's a lot of steps or hoops that a trained investigator is going to go through when they receive information, let's say it from a criminal. Lack of credibility is going to be a problem for them.
So we had a polygraph done. Polygraph was that Sid was telling us the truth when he said he was not involved in the crime. There was just nothing there that we could come up with which would cause any type of a motive. As strange as what Sid was, he didn't have any guts at all. He's scared, he's paranoid, and I don't think Sid could do it.
When detectives press Sid for information, he puts forward an interesting theory.
He told the investigators about people that were after him and his girlfriend, and he felt that they were the intended victims of this shooting. They had very dangerous connections with a motorcycle group out of Detroit. He'd sell them narcotics, but he'd either short them or he wouldn't pay enough, and he'd get in trouble because of it.
He had actually been shot at, allegedly, out at the local motorcycle club's house.
But it was one event in particular that led Sid to believe he'd become a target.
At one point, Sid had agreed to fix a car for one of the group's girlfriends. And Sid and his girlfriend, Chico, decided they'd be better off selling the car. They used the money for themselves, and obviously got into a lot of hot water with this group out of Detroit.
If you're in a motorcycle gang, you don't do that to the Brotherhood.
He claims that after that, these people came to his house to get him prior to this killing, and he ran them off with an automatic rifle.
Sid believes this may have led the gang to hire a hitman.
He'd be told where to go, and that there'll be a guy and a gal at that house, and their job would be to take care of the guy and the gal. And Sid believed that this was what happened with Rick and Gail, and that it was meant for he and Chico.
2 people shot in the head, execution style. That looks like a hit to me.
Michigan detectives believe the Brink murders may be a result of mistaken identity. A gang hit meant for the former owner of the house.
In the drug world, if you don't pay your drug debt, this is what happens. But in a lot of cases, no one's going to talk because the code of the street of not cooperating or helping the police, therefore becoming a rat, is very strong.
Detectives must find a way to place the gang at the scene of the crime. They contact a narcotics unit with agents placed inside the organization.
The informant we had was set up through the Michigan State Police. They had persons in this motorcycle gang that should have been able to determine whether or not this motorcycle group was involved. 2 names came up. One was Ghetto Rat, the other was Grizz. Grizz, within a week of this homicide, was shot and killed in Detroit. Ghetto Rat was interviewed. He said, if our club killed him, he said, I'd have been there. And he said, it didn't happen. Obviously, this is just a statement from him, but he was very believable. The scenario of this motorcycle group out of Detroit coming there to kill Sid Colby and Chico made some sense. but there was nothing there. So now you're weeks into this thing with a lot of hope, and all of a sudden that's gone.
Without any new leads, the case begins to stall.
There isn't anybody else out there that we could come up with that had any motive or any reason to kill Rick and Gail Brink. With a motive, it's pretty difficult to solve the crime. I would go back to the family, telling them we don't have anything more, telling them that we're going to keep working on it, and each time going back and not having anything to give them, I think was the most difficult and frustrating part of it.
In 1995, Detective Wassing retires after 31 years on the force.
I didn't like leaving with open cases. Some of these cases can wear on you. This one probably weighed on me the greatest of all of them.
In 2011, 24 years after the murders, the investigation is assigned to cold case detectives Venus Repper and David Blakely.
You had to go back into the books, relearn everything that they did.
We always had a philosophy that the person who did it is in there. It was a matter of going through the detective notes and putting those in order, doing it chronological.
In cold case investigations, you will, from time to time, find the killer in the original box, we'll call it, of evidence. In this case, the violence portrayed at the crime scene would suggest it was someone known to the deceased. Access to the crime scene, no sign of forced entry.
During their review, something odd stands out to Detective Repper.
When we looked through the crime scene photos, one of the questions, there was a pillow that was placed over Gail's face. The pillow was actually a pillow that belonged in the living room. If it would have been put there beforehand, you would see some type of bullet holes. The pillow had blood residue, so it would have been placed there after Gail had been murdered. So we knew that it had to be the killer who put the pillow over her face.
Why is a pillow from the living room over the head of the victim in the bedroom?
That, to me, was more like somebody not wanting to look at him.
And that emotionally says, I don't want to see this. The kind of individual you're looking at knew Rick and Gail very well.
This prompts the cold case detectives to focus on Rick and Gail's families.
You must look at the family. You have to eliminate them. Certainly if there's insurance, valuables, assets involved, we have a recipe for potential disaster.
We first interviewed Bud, Rick's brother. One of the things we found out was that if something happened to Rick, Bud would be the one to inherit everything.
Wills can tear families apart. That could be a motive for someone to get very upset and perhaps commit murder.
Those were questions that we posed to him as far as whether he was responsible, whether he was involved in the homicide. Bud was college educated, he had a good job. He himself was a success on his own. He said he and his brother really had a good relationship. As far as his alibi, he was actually home with his wife. There was no animosity. There was nothing to indicate that there was any issue between Bud and Rick.
They turn their attention towards Gail's family.
Gail had a very challenging childhood. She came from a very large family. Her mother, I don't think she was capable of caring for as many children as what she had.
I think there was just some real dysfunction going on there, and so the kids were the ones that were responsible for taking care of themselves.
They talked to Cheryl Murphy, Gail's older sister.
They had a really good relationship. She basically helped raise Gail. She does not live in the state and doesn't maintain everyday contact with her family. Before Dave and I got the case, another detective asked her, write down some conversations you've had or some things pertaining to this. She had some concerns about her brother Ryan. Cheryl would say Ryan's controlling. He wants you to do what he says, and her and him did not get along. They butted heads. She said, he's my brother, but he's a control freak. There were some red flags that we were like, that's not right. Something's wrong there. So we found out as much information as we could about Ryan.
Cheryl tells detectives about a family dispute that had been brewing the week before the murder.
Ryan was renting a house, and her parents and the younger siblings were living in a trailer in Ryan's driveway. He had indicated that his landlord had gotten upset about it and wanted him out of there.
Cheryl says this prompted Ryan to call Gail the day before she was killed.
He told Gail, you got that house, let mom and dad come live with you. And she basically told him, no, I'm not gonna do it. Rick won't allow it. It's not gonna happen. She had actually told her, he's mad, he's furious.
That had never been learned by the original investigators.
I interviewed Cheryl Murphy several times, but she never told us that Gail had called her on the Friday night prior to the murder and told her what a violent confrontation she and Ryan had had.
Cheryl goes even further.
She said that when her father had told them that Gail and Rick were dead, Ryan got up and went right to Rick and Gail's house. She's like, how did he know they were at the house? He didn't ask or anything. All these years, Ryan had gone under the radar and not really been looked at. He needed to be looked at a lot more.
Cold case detectives investigating the murder of Rick and Gail Brink have focused their attention on Gail's brother Ryan.
We wanted to have it where when we interviewed Ryan, we knew about him. We kind of thought there was something there.
They learn Ryan is now married to the woman he was with the night the murders happened, Pam Wingarden.
As far as for Ryan's alibi back in '87, he had indicated that he and Pam had gone to a laundromat to do laundry, 5 to 8-ish. And then from there, they went over to Pam's girlfriend's house where they hung out there. And I believe Ryan then took Pam home around 2 in the morning.
Aiming to verify their version of events, detectives bring Ryan and Pam in for questioning.
We made that tactical decision to interview Pam first because we knew Ryan's a control freak. He thought he was going to be able to be interviewed with her. So we told him to come back, but he said, no, I'll wait here.
Detectives ask Pam about the story she told 25 years ago.
She said basically, I don't remember, I can't remember. And I'm just like, well, we're just asking you to be truthful.
Pam was very reluctant. One of the things that Venus did was gain trust. She built rapport.
She finally admitted that Ryan was not with her that night. So we knew something was up. But at that point, she's like, I'm gonna go home. And I asked her, are you gonna be okay? Because I was concerned if he's this controlling, and you just told us that you lied for your husband. I mean, we gave her every opportunity. Well, she left. We knew Pam knew more than what she was saying, but wasn't really willing to share yet. We didn't feel she was responsible for it, but we weren't able to make an arrest. So we then brought Ryan in. And he didn't care for women. So actually, Dave took the lead on this interview.
His body language was total deception.
We told him, your wife said you weren't with her. Well, she's confused. No, she's confused. This is what we did.
He didn't want us to talk to Pam. He didn't want us to do a complete investigation.
He denied any involvement in his sister and brother-in-law's homicide.
If your brother or your sister was murdered and you had nothing to do with it, you would do everything you could to help. Here you have a blood brother not helping.
Pretty much after that, Ryan left.
With differing accounts from Pam and Ryan, detectives must find a way to verify his whereabouts the night his sister was murdered.
Back in 1987, Ryan was not only dating Pam, but he was dating another girl named Chris. So we then went and interviewed her. Talked to her about her relationship with Ryan and things that had happened. She said, Ryan wanted kids, I couldn't give him kids.
And so that was the demise of their relationship.
We kind of went through the interview. We were there for maybe an hour. And then we're kind of like, okay, anything else? No. And literally, we're like getting up out of our chairs, and she's like, well, there is this one thing. And we look at each other and we sit back down and we're like, well, what is it? And she proceeds to tell us about how Ryan came over and told her his sister had been murdered. And it was 2 days after they were found, and asked, can you go with me for a ride? And she's like, then he drove me around. We went to the park. And she goes, he sat there and he was crying and he was talking about what a terrible person he was. And she's like, you know, I was afraid he was gonna tell me he killed her. And we said, what did he tell you? And at that point she said that he had said he had a sexual relationship with her, that he basically had raped his sister. That it happened more than once, and that she wasn't willing.
That was huge. That was the aha moment. If Gail had told Rick about the abuse, Ryan was going to be exposed. The question at that time was, is the aha moment going to turn into a confession?
Detectives Repper and Blakely bring Ryan in for a second interview.
Dave started talking to him about his relationship with Gail.
I was repeatedly asking him to tell me about that. What happened there? And he would respond with, what are you getting at, Dave? It was a pretty intense time.
We sat there, it was like 40 seconds, just staring. It was a stare down. And finally, Ryan admitted at that point that he had a sexual relationship with his sister. And he said it was just kids play, kids play. We kind of threw out there, well, you told Chris that, you know, it was basically like rape. He again downplayed the abuse. It was experimentation. No one was hurt, it only happened a little bit, and that was it.
Despite this admission, Ryan remains steadfast in denying his involvement in the murders.
So we still didn't have enough, but we at least had now a different path that we were going.
Detectives must prove beyond doubt that Ryan pulled the trigger 25 years ago.
We basically interviewed people all around him. interviewed his friends. We found Jim Meacham. Jim is a good friend of Ryan's. They hung out, they'd known each other for years. They kind of ran in the same circle. We interviewed him, and he recalled how he found out that Gail had been murdered. Jim, he would go to Ryan's house in the morning and he would have coffee with Ryan before he'd go to work sometimes. And he said it would be really, really early. He had gone there the day the bodies were discovered. And Ryan was up and Pam was up, and he's like, they're both crying, tears and everything. And he's like, what's wrong? And he said that Ryan had said, my sister's been murdered. The importance of that is Rick and Gail were not found murdered until 11 o'clock in the morning on that Monday. So the only way he could tell Jim Meacham that they were dead that early is if he was involved in the homicide.
After 25 years of investigation, detectives have found a flaw in Ryan Wingarden's timeline that convinces them of his guilt.
So you've got motive and you've got opportunity. You've got them both in spades, but you're going to need more than that to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person committed this murder.
Armed with their new information, detectives decide to re-interview his wife, Pam.
Along with the fact that she had lied to police about his alibi, we knew that she was hiding information. That's a lot of pressure on an individual.
But we said, you know what? She is a victim too. She's basically married this man after he may have done this horrible thing, and you have to get her to feel comfortable to come out with this information and share it. So at that point, Dave and I then made the decision to go to Pam's work. We just basically said, you know, we'd like to talk to you. And she said, yeah, I'll listen. We said, we are giving you the opportunity to come forward and tell us your story. The truth is gonna come out. You need to do what's right for your kids.
And we said, Pam, you need to come clean on this deal. Which she did.
She basically came out and admitted that Ryan had come over that night, was all upset, and had said, I killed Rick and Gail.
Pam's confession, along with the reconstructed timeline, lays out the final hours of Rick and Gail Brink and how a secret between siblings was the spark for their murder.
On Saturday, they went to the wedding. A bunch of people went to the bar after the wedding, and they were at the bar till probably around 11-ish. They would have been home no later than 11:30. Rick and Gail were up watching TV.
Ryan came over. There was a confrontation.
I think Ryan knew that Rick knew about the abusive relationship that he had with his sister. And I think Ryan was jealous of the life that Gail was starting to get for herself.
Gail told Ryan to get out and not to come back.
Gail turned around, walked down the hall, went to bed. And at that point, Rick looked at him and said, you really need to go. So Ryan then left the home. Ryan came back to the door saying he had car trouble. And then Rick had slipped on his galoshes. He still had on his wedding attire, put his old work coat on, went, got in the truck in the driver's side. And that's where Ryan shot him with a .22 in the head. He then went in the house, walked back to the bedroom. Where he then shot Gail in the head 3 times. Ryan then went back over to Pam's house. He then takes Pam back to Rick and Gail's home where he killed him. He then takes her back to the bedroom where he shows her Gail, and he actually is the one that puts the pillow on her head. And he indicates to her, if you tell anybody, this will happen to you. They then go back to Ryan's home. Ryan does take clothing items in the gun in a bag, and he discards them somewhere. You know, years went on, they had this secret. They just buried it.
Detectives have enough to arrest Ryan Wingarden.
I read him his rights, and I asked him no questions. But it was the look on Ryan's face.
He adamantly said that we badgered Pam, that she's only saying that because she wants a divorce, and, you know, and how dare she, just anything but accept responsibility for it.
His mode was jealousy, and that he was going to be exposed about his sexual abuse with his sister.
On March 28, 2014, 26 years after the murder of Gail and Rick Brink, a jury finds Wingarden guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He is appealing his conviction.
When I look at Ryan, what do I see? I just see darkness. I felt like we had pulled a piece of darkness out of the world.
Dave and Venus, the cold case team, they worked their hearts out. I was thankful that they got to the bottom of it.
We brought the right person to justice, but it's always there, and I think it's sad for both families. The Wingarden family, you know, they lost their daughter by the hands of their own son. The Brinks, they lost their son, and they lost a daughter-in-law. It's just something their family will always have to deal with.